She gives in to Trump after a disastrous meeting in Beijing, and the sign appeared right at the negotiating table. This Thursday, May 14, 2026, the Chinese leader tried to turn Donald Trump's arrival into a showcase of power. But behind the theatrics, Xi entered the conversation worried about Taiwan, tariffs, technology, and energy. And there was an even more serious factor, the war in Iran, which put oil, sanctions, and the Strait of Hormuz at the center of American pressure. The Chinese leader didn't start the conversation by announcing victory. He spoke about the Thucydides trap, instability, and the risk of conflict because he knew that Trump arrived in China with the weapons that Beijing truly respects: tariffs, technology, the consumer market, and pressure on energy routes. The Thucydides trap was the most revealing message. This expression refers to the risk of war when a rising power challenges the dominant power. When Xi uses this term in front of Trump, he is not speaking as someone who is calm. He acknowledges that the dispute with the United States has reached a dangerous point for China itself. Beijing wants to grow, wants to dominate technology, wants to pressure Taiwan, wants to expand its influence in the Middle East, but it knows that a poorly calculated confrontation with Trump could be too costly. I'll explain that soon, but for now, subscribe to the channel to stay updated. Informações em tempo real. Informed. Real-time information with the best journalistic quality. Subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell to get notifications about new videos. Warned about the risk of conflict if Taiwan were poorly managed, and also address trade, technology, and Iran. See you next time. Taiwan appeared as China's strategic vulnerability. Xi knows that this is the point where Chinese expansion meets the military and diplomatic limits of the United States. When Beijing insists that Taiwan is an internal matter, it tries to keep Washington away from the most sensitive area of the Pacific. But Trump did not arrive in Beijing as an ordinary visitor. The meeting was not about courtesy. It was about who would bear the greater cost if the dispute got out of control. The tariffs also took a toll. China depends on exports, access to foreign consumers, and stability to keep its industrial machine running. The factor that made everything worse was Iran. She was already worried about Taiwan and tariffs, but the war in Iran put an economic bomb on Beijing's doorstep. China buys energy, depends on maritime routes, and uses its relationship with Tehran as a tool of influence against the United States. But Trump brought that relationship into the meeting. According to Reuters, the war in Iran dominated the visit, with recent attacks on ships near Hormuz and American pressure for Beijing to take a more active role regarding Tehran. After the meeting, the White House stated that Trump and Xi agreed that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open and that Iran cannot obtain a nuclear weapon. This is the point that changes the interpretation of the meeting. Xi was not just defending Chinese trade. He was trying to prevent the war in Iran from directly affecting China's pocketbook. Hormuz is a vital passage for energy, and instability in the region threatens ships, insurance, prices, and supply. Reuters reported that China's oil imports fell by about a fifth in April amid the impact of the war in Iran and the crisis in the Middle East. For an industrial power, this is a warning sign. A secure China wouldn't need to discuss buying more American oil to reduce its dependence on a route under pressure. But that's exactly what appeared in the meeting summary. The pressure came even before Trump stepped into the room. On May 11, Washington announced sanctions against 3 people and 9 companies accused of helping ship Iranian oil to China. The measures targeted networks in Hong Kong, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman, focusing on cutting off money used by the Iranian regime and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. In other words, Trump arrived in Beijing after targeting the most sensitive link between China and Iran: oil, logistics, and financing. He didn't just receive the American president. He received a man who had just struck at the mechanism that connects Beijing to Iran. Reuters reported in April that more than 3,000 people had died in Iran since the start of the war on February 28, according to the Iranian Forensic Authority. This number helps explain why the issue became so prominent at the table. The crisis was not abstract. It involved deaths, threatened ships, pressured energy supplies, expanding sanctions, and the risk of an escalation that could affect China, the United States, Israel, Gulf nations, and all global trade. That's why Xi's surrender didn't come across as a phrase of defeat. It appeared as a necessity to negotiate within the framework set up by Trump. Xi wanted to speak as a rising power, but he had to deal with keeping Hormuz open, preventing Iran from getting nuclear weapons, buying American oil, trade, Taiwan, and the risk of conflict. China tried to control its image with ceremony, discipline, and state spectacle. Trump controlled the agenda by putting energy, tariffs, and sanctions in the same package. History shows that China understands when it encounters a real limit. In the Taiwan Strait crisis of 1995 and 1996, Beijing conducted missile tests and military exercises to intimidate Taiwan before the island's presidential election. The United States responded with a naval presence and aircraft carrier groups in the region, showing that Chinese intimidation would come at a cost. That crisis taught the Chinese regime that displays of strength only work until they encounter a power willing to show its presence. Today, the logic returns in another form. Trump didn't need to arrive in Beijing issuing public threats. He arrived with tariffs, sanctions against Iranian oil, and pressure on Hormuz. Xi saw that Taiwan was not the only front. China was being pressured in the Pacific, in trade, and in the Middle East at the same time. Other nations also help explain this shift. India, even within the BRICS, called for maritime stability after attacks on vessels, showing that the crisis in Iran created rifts among partners who normally criticize Washington. Gulf nations, which depend on energy and safe transportation, cannot accept Iran turning Hormuz into a tool of permanent blackmail. China itself, despite its rhetoric of sovereignty and opposition to sanctions, needs open routes and stable oil supplies. This is Xi's dilemma. He poses alongside Iran and Russia on the diplomatic stage. But his economy needs routes that only remain safe when the United States maintains military, commercial, and financial pressure. Xi left having to publicly accept that Hormuz must remain open and that Tehran cannot acquire nuclear weapons. For a China that is trying to present itself as the new dominant power, this outcome carries weight. I'm Milson Alves, Global, and my purpose is to keep you well informed every day with honest reporting. The news links are in the video description. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end, check out the comments so you can be even more engaged with the Milson Alves community.